Emperor Nero's name is forever tied to tyranny, madness, and a reign filled with cruelty. He's remembered for his extravagance, the burning of Rome, and his infamy as one of history's most tyrannical rulers. But among his many shocking actions, one stands out as particularly bizarre, even by his standards. After the death of his wife, Octavia, Nero made a decision so strange and disturbing that it has haunted history ever since. He castrated a young boy to replace her as his wife. But why would a ruler with absolute power, wealth, and influence do something so horrific? What could have driven Nero to take such a drastic, dehumanizing step? Was it love, obsession, or perhaps something darker that fueled this act? In today's video, we'll unravel the twisted tale behind Nero's obsession with power, how he responded to the death of his wife, and the shocking lengths he went to replace her. We'll also examine the impact this gruesome act had on his reign and legacy. Before we dive into the details of Nero's twisted obsession, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss an incredible, shocking history story like this one from us. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories from history's darkest corners. Don't miss out on what's coming next. Now, let's uncover the madness behind Nero's strange obsession. Emperor Nero, Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, just his name alone is a reminder of his complex and brutal reign as the fifth Roman emperor. His time in power is marked by scandal, cruelty, and an obsession with power unlike any other Roman ruler before him. But what makes Nero's story even more chilling is the personal obsession that drove him to commit unimaginable acts.
Born in 37 AD, Nero's rise to the throne wasn't exactly a smooth one. He wasn't the first in line to become emperor, but after a series of untimely deaths, he found himself in a position of power at just 16 years old. He inherited a volatile empire, and initially his reign seemed promising. He was seen as a ruler who might bring about change. But as time went on, Nero's thirst for absolute control, luxury, and indulgence grew, and his rule turned into a chaotic spiral of tyranny. His obsession with power wasn't just about conquering lands or increasing Rome's wealth. It extended deeply into his personal life, particularly his relationships. Nero was known for his eccentric tastes, his extravagant performances, and his unhealthy obsession with public approval. He wanted to be adored, not just as an emperor, but as an actor, singer, and poet. He forced high-ranking citizens, including the Senate, to watch him sing and perform on stage, even though these performances were far below his position. He was often mocked for his theatrical performances, but it didn't stop him from pursuing fame and adulation as an actor, singer, and poet. But beneath this public persona, Nero's true nature as a ruler was dark and unpredictable. He had little regard for anyone who might stand in his way. His lust for power led him to commit horrific acts against those closest to him, including family members, advisors, and even his own mother, Agrippina the Younger. His cruelty knew no bounds, and he would stop at nothing to maintain control over the empire. One of the most shocking examples of Nero's madness occurred after the death of his beloved wife, Octavia. Their marriage had been a political alliance, but it was clear that Nero had developed some form of attachment to her. When she died in 62 AD, Nero's grief didn't manifest in a typical way. It turned into a sick obsession. Rather than mourning her loss in a conventional manner, Nero's grief spiraled into something much darker. He became fixated on finding someone to replace Octavia in his life.
But instead of seeking another wife, Nero's desire to keep the memory of Octavia alive took a horrifying turn. He decided that the boy, who had been a member of his court, would replace her in the most grotesque way imaginable. But what led Nero to such an extreme measure? What pushed him to castrate a young boy? A decision so bizarre it shocks us to this day. The death of Nero's wife, Octavia, was a pivotal moment in his reign, a turning point that set the stage for some of the most bizarre and disturbing actions he would take as emperor. But what happened after her death, and why did it push Nero further into madness? Octavia was not just Nero's wife, she was his second wife, and her marriage to him was initially one of political convenience. She came from a prominent and noble family, and their union had been arranged to solidify Nero's political standing. Yet, despite the fact that it was a marriage of convenience, there was a clear emotional attachment. Nero was devastated by her death, though not for the reasons we might expect. Historians debate the cause of Octavia's death. Some accounts claim that she died naturally, perhaps from a disease or an illness that was common at the time. Others, however, suggest that Nero, ever paranoid and ever concerned with consolidating his power, may have had her murdered. After all, Octavia's noble birth made her a potential rival to Nero's own power, and he had shown little hesitation before when it came to eliminating threats, even from those closest to him. It's not beyond reason to assume that Nero saw her as a political liability, or even just a reminder of the conventional duties of marriage that he had no patience for. What we know for sure is that following Octavia's death, Nero's grief quickly turned into obsession. Rather than mourning her in a healthy way, Nero became consumed by the idea of replacing her.
But not just with another woman. He wanted a replacement in a much darker, more twisted form. His obsession with keeping Octavia's presence in his life led him to a grotesque conclusion. He would find someone who could serve as his wife and carry on her memory, but in a way that was entirely outside the norms of Roman society. At this point, Nero's obsession with power and his own legacy began to manifest in extreme and disturbing ways. The boy in question was Sporus, a young servant boy whom Nero had taken a liking to. Sporus was likely a beautiful young male whom Nero thought could embody the characteristics of his deceased wife. But instead of simply marrying another woman, Nero decided to castrate Sporus in order to make him a living, breathing replacement for Octavia. The act of castration was carried out with Nero's blessing, and as strange as it sounds, Nero was said to have publicly married the boy, dressing him in the same clothing that Octavia had worn. In fact, he even gave Sporus the title of Empress and insisted that Sporus adopt the name Sabina, the same name as Nero's late wife. In the eyes of Nero, Sporus had become the perfect replacement for Octavia. But this twisted marriage wasn't a moment of loss and mourning. It was a reflection of Nero's complete detachment from humanity and his descent into madness. Nero's actions were beyond anything seen in the ancient world. While rulers might have married for political reasons or personal gain, no emperor had ever gone to such lengths to replace a deceased spouse in such a horrific way. It's said that Nero didn't just treat Sporus as a surrogate for Octavia. He forced him to play the role of his deceased wife in every way possible. Nero's obsession with maintaining the illusion of his dead wife was so powerful that he believed castrating Sporus and keeping him by his side would somehow keep Octavia alive in spirit. But it wasn't just Nero's cruelty towards Sporus that made this story so chilling. The act was a testament to his complete abandonment of rationality. By castrating a young boy and forcing him to become a wife in a way that defied not just societal norms, but human decency, Nero showed just how deep his madness had gone. This act was not just about power, it was about control of life and death, and an obsessive attempt to hold on to something that was already gone. But this wasn't the only strange act Nero would commit in the wake of Octavia's death. His rule would spiral further into cruelty and absurdity.
As disturbing as Nero's actions might seem, the case of Sporus, the boy he castrated to replace his dead wife, is even more chilling when we explore the details of the process itself. How could Nero, a powerful emperor, go to such horrific lengths to fulfill his obsession? And what was life like for Sporus after he became Nero's twisted version of Octavia? To understand the magnitude of this act, we first need to look at the boy Nero chose, Sporus. Little is known about Sporus's life before his involvement with Nero, but historians believe that he was likely a young servant or a court official, a person of relatively low social standing. His beauty and appearance were likely the primary reasons Nero selected him. In Nero's eyes, Sporus had the right qualities to become a living, breathing replica of his deceased wife, Octavia. But Sporus was far from willing. Castration in ancient times was not a decision made lightly. It was a brutal and permanent procedure. For someone to be castrated, especially by the will of an emperor, meant a life of humiliation, torment, and degradation. Nero, however, was so consumed by his obsession with Octavia that he saw Sporus as a mere object, a vessel to carry out his personal fantasies. He couldn't care less about the boy's well-being or personal agency. The castration itself, while rarely documented in full detail, was likely as horrific as it sounds, and Nero's decision to physically transform Sporus into his ideal wife wasn't just about replacing Octavia. It was about reducing a human being to an object for his own satisfaction. After Sporus was castrated, Nero then insisted that he be dressed in the finest clothes, matching the style of Octavia. This wasn't just a physical transformation, this was an attempt to erase Sporus's identity entirely and replace him with the image of the woman Nero had lost. Once castrated, Sporus was forced to live out the role of Nero's wife. Nero paraded him around in public, treating him as if he were his legitimate spouse, even though Sporus was still a boy, psychologically and physically broken. Sporus was even made to adopt the name Sabina, Octavia's name, and was expected to embody the very essence of the late wife, becoming the perfect replica in every way. Nero treated Sporus as a puppet, using him to fulfill his obsessive desire for control over life and death, using the boy to replace the wife who had already passed. Imagine the horrors Sporus must have endured. Not only was his body irrevocably altered, but he was also subjected to the whims of a cruel emperor who expected him to behave like the wife he had lost. Sporus would have been forced to adopt a false identity, stripped of his dignity, humanity, and independence. The fact that this act was carried out publicly only added to the humiliation he must have felt, both as a victim of Nero's obsession and as a powerless figure caught in the emperor's mad desire for control. But the suffering didn't stop there. As historians point out, Sporus was not only a victim of Nero's sexual and emotional obsession, but also of the political game Nero was playing. Having Sporus by his side as a replacement for Octavia served a dual purpose. It kept the emperor's grief in check, but it also sent a message to the people of Rome about his unchallenged power. By publicly marrying a castrated boy, Nero further demonstrated his control over life and death, using Sporus as a living symbol of his authority. In the eyes of the public, Sporus had become a grotesque symbol of Nero's madness. No longer a person with rights or dignity, he was reduced to a mere object, a puppet for the emperor's twisted desires. While the rest of Rome may have seen Sporus as a symbol of Nero's power, for Sporus, it was a nightmare that likely lasted until the end of his life. But Sporus's fate wasn't just about the immediate aftermath of castration. It was also about how Nero's obsession shaped the future. As we'll see in the next chapter, the repercussions of Nero's actions went far beyond Sporus. His reign became increasingly erratic, and the political fallout from such bizarre decisions would have profound consequences on the empire and its people. But Sporus wasn't the only one to suffer under Nero's increasingly unstable rule. The emperor's actions would soon spiral out of control, and his relationship with his new wife was just the beginning of a reign that would see cruelty, chaos, and ultimately Nero's downfall. Let's look at how the political and social consequences of Nero's madness shaped the empire.
Nero's bizarre marriage to Sporus wasn't just a strange act of personal obsession. It had profound political and social consequences for the Roman Empire. Nero's increasingly erratic behavior, including his treatment of Sporus, shocked both his court and the public. The ramifications of such cruel and bizarre actions began to seep into every corner of Roman society, unraveling the emperor's reign and his image as a ruler. First, let's consider the immediate fallout from this public spectacle. The Roman Empire was no stranger to authoritarian rule and corruption, but Nero's behavior pushed the limits of what the Roman people could accept. Public opinion was crucial to maintaining power in ancient Rome, and Nero's actions became a topic of widespread ridicule and disdain. His marriage to a castrated boy was not just a private matter. It was an open display of his power and madness. The Roman people, who had already begun to see Nero as a tyrant, were now faced with the spectacle of their emperor's grotesque personal life. The Senate, which had already been weakened under Nero's rule, found itself in an even awkwarder position. They had no power to stop him, but they also had to contend with the emperor's growing instability. The more Nero flaunted his cruelty and eccentricities, the more his public image deteriorated. His behavior alienated the Senate and other elites who were concerned about the empire's stability. The once admired emperor was now seen as a madman whose personal desires were beginning to spiral into chaos. But it wasn't just the elite that was affected. Nero's increasingly bizarre acts also affected his military leadership and the stability of the empire itself. The Roman legions, which had been a powerful and loyal force for the emperor, were beginning to question Nero's ability to lead. They saw their emperor not as a ruler who could guide the empire to glory, but as a man whose delusions of grandeur were undermining the very strength of Rome. The empire needed a leader who could maintain discipline and power, not a ruler obsessed with performing on stage or parading around a boy he had castrated to replace his dead wife. Socially, Nero's actions also had a ripple effect on Roman citizens. The marriage of Nero to Sporus became a source of public spectacle and gossip. Roman society was deeply hierarchical and patriarchal, and such an act, breaking all the norms of gender and propriety, was seen as both a political and a moral violation. Nero's disregard for Roman traditions, particularly in the way he treated his subjects and his relationships, further distanced him from the people. As the scandal spread throughout the empire, it became clear that Nero was not the leader the empire needed. His obsession with power, indulgence, and eccentricities began to outshine his political and military accomplishments. He became more of a spectacle than a ruler. His reign, which started with great promise, turned into a chaotic mess that undermined the foundation of the Roman Empire. But perhaps the most significant consequence of Nero's behavior was how it impacted his legacy. Nero's reign came to symbolize excess, cruelty, and instability. The emperor who once dreamed of glory now faced an empire that was slowly crumbling under the weight of his madness. Nero's relationship with Sporus, as bizarre and cruel as it was, became a symbol of his rule. A rule characterized by self-indulgence and reckless disregard for the well-being of the empire. In the end, Nero's inability to maintain power led to his downfall. By 68 AD, just 6 years after the death of Octavia, Nero was forced to flee Rome as the Senate declared him a public enemy. He ultimately took his own life, ending one of the most infamous reigns in Roman history. While his reign is still remembered for the cruelty, madness, and strange obsessions he harbored, Nero's actions also serve as a warning about the dangers of absolute power and unchecked authority. The legacy of Nero's reign, particularly his bizarre marriage to Sporus, lives on as a testament to the darker side of human nature. His reign serves as a reminder that even the most powerful rulers are not immune to the destructive effects of obsession and madness. But what about Sporus? What happened to him after Nero's death? Did he continue to live as Nero's wife, or was he freed from his horrific role?
And so, the reign of Nero, one of the most infamous emperors in Roman history, came to an end, not with the grandeur and power that he had once sought, but in disgrace, a victim of his own madness and obsession. His bizarre act of castrating a boy to replace his dead wife was just one chapter in the twisted tale of a ruler whose cruelty, eccentricities, and delusions of grandeur ultimately led to his downfall. Nero's reign serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of allowing personal obsession to take over one's leadership. The story of Sporus, the young boy who was forced to play the role of Nero's wife, is equally tragic. He was a pawn in a ruler's bizarre power play, stripped of his dignity and humanity, forced to endure a life defined by cruelty. While history may have forgotten Sporus's name, his story is a poignant symbol of the horrors that can arise when rulers like Nero allow their madness to shape their decisions. Nero's death didn't erase the damage he caused. His reign left scars on the empire, and his actions continue to be a chilling reminder of what can happen when the lust for control spirals out of control. The Roman Empire may have survived his downfall, but the shadow of his cruelty haunted it for years to come. If you found this story shocking, make sure to support our channel. Your donations on Buy Me a Coffee help us continue to bring you more fascinating and often disturbing tales from history's darkest corners. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other content, where we dive deep into the strange, the bizarre, and the often forgotten parts of history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you won't miss any more jaw-dropping stories. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in our next video for another round of bizarre tales.